It's November 18, 1987. You're a mail carrier on a rural route in Ina, Illinois, a small town of barely 2,000 people in Jefferson County, where everybody knows everybody and nothing ever happens. You pull up to the Dardeen family mailbox. It's overflowing. That's unusual. You know Keith Dardeen lives here with his pregnant wife Elaine and their 3-year-old son Peter. You've seen them around. Normal family. Quiet. You knock on the door. No answer. You try again. Still nothing. Something feels wrong. You can't explain it. You just know. You call it in. What sheriff's deputies find inside that small rural house will become one of the most disturbing unsolved homicide cases in Illinois history, and one of the least known. Keith Dardeen, 29, is nowhere to be seen. He is found later in a field shot 3 times and his genitals are mutilated. The violence is extreme, far beyond what was necessary to kill. This is personal. This is rage expressed as physicality, a killer who needed to keep going long after the victim stopped moving. But Keith is not the worst of what they find. Elaine Dardeen, 30, 8 months pregnant, is found in a bedroom. She has also been beaten. At some point during the attack, investigators believe while she was still alive, she went into premature labor. Her newborn daughter, whom the family had planned to name Elaine after her mother, was delivered during the assault. The infant was beaten to death. 3-year-old Peter was beaten to death. A baseball bat believed to be the murder weapon is found at the scene. The bat had been used on the mother, the toddler, and a child who had been alive for perhaps minutes. There is no sign of forced entry. No sign of robbery. Nothing taken. No clear motive that investigators can immediately identify. Keith's car is missing. It will be found abandoned 11 miles away in Benton, Illinois, weeks later. No arrests are ever made. In 1995, 8 years after the Dardeen murders, a man named Tommy Lynn Sells confessed to the killings. Sells was a prolific itinerant killer, a drifter who traveled the United States committing murders across state lines, making him exceptionally difficult to track before the modern era of DNA databases and digital records. He was eventually convicted of a separate murder in Texas and executed in 2014. His confession to the Dardeen murders was detailed. Investigators took it seriously, but Sells recanted, as he did with many of his confessions, and the physical evidence available at the time was insufficient to definitively place him at the scene. The Illinois State Police have never officially closed the case. Tommy Lynn Sells is dead. The Dardeen family has never received justice. What makes this case particularly haunting is the geography of Sells' known movements. He operated across an enormous territory, targeting isolated rural families, people in small towns where a stranger passing through wouldn't be immediately noticed or remembered. Ina, Illinois in 1987 fits that profile almost perfectly. The baseball bat as the exclusive weapon across all 4 victims also fits Sells' documented behavioral pattern. He was known to use whatever was available at a scene, improvising with objects already present rather than bringing a signature weapon. A baseball bat found inside a family home requires no planning, no purchase, no trail. But a confession without corroborating physical evidence is not a conviction. And without a conviction, the Dardeen family remains in the category that defines the darkest corner of American true crime. A family annihilated, a killer who may be known, and a case officially unsolved. The Dardeen murders exhibit a behavioral signature that forensic psychologists identify as one of the most diagnostically significant patterns in homicide analysis. Overkill combined with complete victim range. Overkill. Violence that far exceeds what is necessary to cause death, is not random. It is communicative. It tells investigators something about the relationship between the killer and the act, even when the killer and victim are strangers. Overkill in stranger homicides typically indicates one of 2 psychological profiles: a killer in the grip of an acute psychotic episode, or a killer for whom the act of violence itself is the primary gratification, not robbery, not elimination of a witness, not the resolution of a dispute, but the violence as an end in itself. The complete victim range, adult male, adult female, toddler, newborn, indicates the absence of a conventional inhibitory response. Most humans, including most violent offenders, experience escalating psychological resistance as potential victims become more vulnerable. The murder of a child, and particularly of an infant, represents a crossing of a threshold that the vast majority of violent offenders never approach. When that threshold is crossed without apparent hesitation, when the same instrument is applied to every person in a household regardless of age or vulnerability, it indicates a dissociative state or a deeply entrenched dehumanization of the victim category. Tommy Lynn Sells, if he was responsible, fits this psychological profile with disturbing precision. His documented case history shows a consistent pattern of family and multi-victim targeting, an absence of victim preference by age or gender, and a capacity for violence that forensic interviewers described as devoid of the emotional friction that characterizes most violent offenders. He didn't struggle with what he did. He moved through it. Families destroyed by itinerant killers who moved on before the bodies were cold, whose crimes were never connected because the victims were isolated, the witnesses non-existent, and the investigative resources limited. The Dardeen family lived quietly in a small Illinois town. They were nobody's enemy. They had done nothing to invite what came through their door on November 18, 1987. Keith was 29. Elaine was 30. Peter was 3 years old. Their daughter lived for minutes. The case is still open.